Good afternoon, everyone. Our clock is reading 1 p.m. EST, so we're going to go ahead and get started with this webinar. So today's webinar is the third and last in our series about database integrations. Today, we'll be showing you how to connect ProcessMaker to a Microsoft SQL Server database. My name is Summer, and I'm going to be hosting this webinar along with Pablo Barroso, who's going to be showing you a demo about how to connect your instance of ProcessMaker to Microsoft SQL Server database. So before we get started with the demo, I'm going to start off with a short and brief introduction about ProcessMaker. Then I'll move on to a short summary about database integrations with ProcessMaker. Then I'll move on to a little bit more specific information about Microsoft SQL Server and ProcessMaker. And then after that, we'll get to Pablo's awesome demo about this database connection. So let me get started with the summary about ProcessMaker for those of you out there who are not familiar with our BPM software. So our BPM software features a BPMN 2.0 compliant drag and drop process designer. So what that means is that you can design pretty much any type of process from any vertical or industry with our process designer. Most process elements are compatible with almost any type of process that you can imagine, and you can also design processes with minimal knowledge of code as well, which makes it really convenient to design your processes. Our software also features dynamic forms. So what you can do with these dynamic forms is create almost any type of form using, again, a drag and drop designer to design any form in a matter of minutes. And then you only need to design one form to display it on any type of device like you see on the screen right now. So after you have run a few cases of your processes, managers can report on that process data using our data reporting tools. Now, what's really cool about our data reporting tools is that you can customize data charts and tables using data from either ProcessMaker tables or report tables, as well as any data from any database table, like we'll show you with our database connection. And then once you have reported on your process data, you can use that process data along with key performance indicators to optimize your processes. So what you can do with process data and KPIs is find inefficiencies in your processes or areas for improvement, and then apply those areas to your process to optimize and further streamline your business processes to maximize profit and save time. So let's move on to a little bit about database integrations with ProcessMaker. So if you've attended any of the previous webinars in this series, you will already know how to integrate an Oracle database or a PostgreSQL database with ProcessMaker. And then, as you might already know if you have your own instance of ProcessMaker, is that MySQL databases are the default with ProcessMaker. So all of these database types can be queried with SQL from ProcessMaker, and we'll show you a little taste of that today with the demo. And then you can also connect to an unsupported database, meaning databases that weren't listed on this slide, using PHP's database extensions inside a trigger. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about database integrations with ProcessMaker, you can feel free to go to our wiki at wiki.processmaker.com and search for database connections in the search bar. And then last but not least, before we get to the demo, a little bit about ProcessMaker and Microsoft SQL Server databases. So today's demo is going to show you how to enable the MS SQL Server option in the database connections panel. It doesn't show up automatically after you deploy ProcessMaker. There are a few configurations you need to make before it shows up in the interface that Pablo is going to show you in just a moment. Then we'll also show you how to connect ProcessMaker and a Microsoft SQL Server from the Process Designer interface like you see in this image here to get a database connection UID to use to create SQL queries and triggers or in data forms. And then we'll also show you how to query data from an MS SQL Server database from the process and then send data from the process to a Microsoft SQL Server database. So I think that covers the introduction, so I'm going to let Pablo take it away from here. So just give us a minute to make the switch and we'll be right with you.
Okay, hello and welcome to this final demo of the integration of ProcessMaker with other databases. For this occasion, I have chosen this process that you can see here. And what I try to do with this process is to register documents, and these records are going to be written in a table in a database for our Microsoft SQL server. Okay, so that's the idea of this process. That's the main task. Okay, we are proposing to write records and transfer them into a table of our Microsoft SQL server. So for that purpose, it means that I require a connection with my database. It means the Microsoft database. So by default, if you go here, I'm going to show you an example here. By default, my excuses. Okay, by default, you are going to find here in the databases that when I create, such engine does not exist at all. Okay, I can't find Microsoft here. But that's not a restriction. It means that I can add this engine, and therefore I'm going to obtain this database connection. So the way that I'm going to obtain is something that I'm going to explain in both systems. In Windows with a Bitnami installation, and in Linux with a CentOS distribution. So in the case of Windows, I'm going to move to my directory of installation here, and then in this part you have to check first of all that I have to go here to PHP. You have to check that you must have this type of extension. If you look to our wiki page, you are going to find this extension, and it is available for downloading. So if you download it, you put it here, and after locating this extension in this folder, you have to go back. Then you have to go to a file called php.ini and open in an editor. Just let's bear for a moment. So in such file, you have to add this extension. Okay, you enable such extension here. Then you save it. And in Windows, you need to restart the service. This one for Apache server. Okay, we need to restart this service. Okay, so when it is restarted, we move back to our server. Then we are going to refresh everything. And this server that works in Windows is going to have the engine that we have enabled right now during the installation. So we open any process, And then here in the database connections, you create a database, and there you have Microsoft SQL Server has been shown. So, 3 steps that you have to follow. The downloading of the package, as I have shown you, enabling such extension in php.ini, and finally we need to restart Apache server. So with those considerations, you are going to have this engine enabled here. For Linux, things are going to be different. This is for Linux, so something that you have to know is that you need to install such package. So I'm going to show you that such package is installed, okay? And there you have. This is the package that we have installed, okay? So once it is installed, you have to make the same thing that we have done in Windows. We enable it in this file, php.ini. You add the extension in this file, and there you have. You are going to then have this extension enabled, and finally you need to restart your web server. So the same 3 steps, but obviously this is going to be very different from what we have seen in the case of Windows. So, but it follows the same thing, that you have to enable in php.ini that extension that makes possible the inclusion of the engine of Microsoft. So when that happens, it means that when I move here in database connections, I create a database, I find this one. I find this engine as an option. Fortunately, I have created this connection, and in this connection I have selected the engine, the encoding, the server, this one, the database, and then the credentials. The port is automatically given. I test the connection, I save it. Since everything is correct, I'm going to receive an ID of connection. This ID identifies the connection between Microsoft SQL Server and my ProcessMaker instance here. The way that I interact with this database is going to be represented by one of the steps that I have here. And it is this one. This is a trigger that allows me, to transfer the records to a table in my Microsoft SQL Server. And the way that I can recognize that work with that database is with this ID, and this ID, I have told you, is the ID that we have discussed before here. Okay? So when that happens, I'm ready to use such process. So let me tell you that here, the way that I can enter to the database is by using a workbench. So in this case, I'm using the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. And in here, you're going to find these tables. Actually, this table is the one that I'm using. And I'm going to apply here a query. And this is going to be dbo document version. I execute the query, and notice that I have here 6 records. I'm going to add 2 records more. So I'm going to move here, and then I'm going to move to home, start a new case, and then initiate a case here. I'm going to call it this 7th version, quality assurance, and then here our current date. Another one, this is the 8th version. Again, I can call it quality assurance. Okay. And then we provide all of this. So now I'm going to submit, continue, and finally finish the process. So if I move to the workbench and then make the refresh, okay, so I'm going to apply here again the query. You can see that 2 records have been added. Okay, so this shows that we have the capacity to integrate ProcessMaker with other databases. So we have gone through the case of Oracle, then Postgres, and finally we visit Microsoft SQL Server. As part of this series, I'm very glad to show you all these kind of integrations and the ways that we can install or consider. Well, for me, it has been a pleasure to show you this demo. Thanks for your attendance, and let's finish this webinar. If you have any questions, please, we are going to move to the section of Q&A, and in this section you can write your questions on the section of Q&A sections that you have here in your Global GoToWebinar. So we are going to answer all of them. Okay?
Sorry for the long pause there, but like Pablo said before, you can go ahead and submit your questions using the question functionality on your GoToWebinar panel. And meanwhile, while you guys are writing your questions, I just want to tell you about some upcoming webinars that we have going on. So on Thursday, December 6th, we have the first in our detailed series about new or improved features in ProcessMaker 3.3. So that first one is going to be maintain organized and comprehensive logs with ProcessMaker's audit tools. And again, that's taking place on Thursday, December 6th. The next webinar we have in our in-depth series about ProcessMaker 3.3 is a simple and clean workflow documentation with a process documenter plugin. And that's on Thursday, January 17th at 11 a.m. New York time. And then finally, we also have another in-depth webinar about ProcessMaker 3.3 that is going to showcase simple sign-in with the Google Authentication plugin, and that one will take place on Thursday, January 31st at 11 a.m. New York time. So we're going to get to your questions very shortly.
The first question says, that's PHP 5.6. Is it compatible with PHP 7.1 to connect to my MS SQL database? If you have the package that is necessary for PHP 7.1, yes, it is compatible. Then I have another question. Can I run ProcessMaker entirely on MS SQL and not on MySQL? You need to make the installation with MySQL. It's by default that the installation runs with MySQL. All our data and tables are stored in MySQL. By default, all our stacks use MySQL. I have another question, and it says, do these instructions for MS SQL Server apply to SAP SQL Anywhere? Okay, and it says database also as in the past, or there are other steps for SQL Anywhere database. Well, for people who want to know about other database connections, I invite you to see our wiki page. Okay, so maybe you have to make some extra configurations. For these demos that we have shown in this series of databases, we have offered the most common databases for our customers. But if you need some special database, you can visit our wiki page, or you can consult us, and then we are going to provide you the technical advice that you require. Then I have another question, and it says, thanks a lot for the webinar. How can I add validations for data? For example, validate that a record exists in any table. Well, if you are very knowledgeable in SQL, I think that you can find the solution there. Okay. In some cases, for the creation for a table, you can make the drop of that table. So I suggest that you can use the SQL necessary for that case, and then you can validate if that record does not exist. Another way that you can find, if you make a unique key, maybe you have two similar records that with different IDs as keys, so that it makes helpful for you. Okay. In the demo, if you have noticed, I have written trigger with a query, and with that query, you could add some custom code to validate the data. Another question is, how can SQL query return success or error to the process? Well, if you add some code that it requires for that validation, you can add it and then make it work. So it's more the way that you can enter your code there. I have another question, and it says, is it possible to use MS SQL stored procedures in place or inline queries? Well, the way that you can use is by using some SQL queries, as you have seen here. Then I have another question, and it says, to decide if a process goes one way or another. Oh, well, it was the person who was written, but he divided the question into. Well, the point is that if you remember in the demo, I'm going to go back to that part. That main trigger was used to show you all the code in PHP, and immersed in this code, I have added some query. So in that query, you can make some conditionals. There is no restriction at all. Okay. So there is no restriction. If you need to add some conditions that make your validations for not making the same query, you can add it. No restriction at all. The only thing is that if you are knowledgeable of using these type of queries, okay, you are free to use it. Okay, so, well, I think that right now all these questions have been answered. Okay, so I invite you to check our wiki website. In such wiki, you are going to find a lot of information for this topic, and not only for the 3 databases that we have explained in this series. So for me, it has been a pleasure to show you this demo, and to show you also the webinar, the complete webinar, and answer your questions. Thanks for your attendance. Bye.